In this edition of Global Print, I'm going to talk to you about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now, we know that the invasion is about 1 week old. The West has come down very heavily on Russia, sanctioning not just President Vladimir Putin, but his close circle of advisors. There has been an attempt to undermine the Russian economy. Sanctions are kicking into Russia because the stock market hasn't opened, the ruble has fallen, and inside Ukraine, innocent civilians are being killed. At the Security Council, at the United Nations, 2 votes have taken place in this past week. India has abstained on both votes. There has also been a debate at the UN General Assembly. But in this edition of Global Print, I'm actually not going to talk about all the strategic matters, but I'm going to talk about the Indian students who are caught in the war zone inside Ukraine. But before I talk about what's going on inside Ukraine and India's positions, dear viewer, I'd like to make an appeal to you. Please do subscribe. Pay just a little bit for the Print's free, fair, objective and unhyphenated journalism. It's only rupees 159. All you need to do is to click on the join button, pay this very little sum of money and become a member of the Print, which will give you privileges and access that other non-members don't have. It's very little money, like I said, but you have supported us in these past several months of the pandemic. So I do hope that you will continue to support us in our endeavor to bring you this unhyphenated journalism that the Print is now well known for. So in my column, Global Print, this week on the Print's website, I talk about this other part of India's foreign policy effort, which is to bring out all the students in Ukraine who have been caught in this war zone. Now, very unfortunately, we know that one student, a 21-year-old medical student, has been killed. He was in Kharkiv, which is in western Ukraine, very close to the Russia-Ukraine border. He evidently stepped out to buy some groceries, and while he was standing in the queue in front of a shop, he was killed in firing. Some say that this firing came from Russian soldiers. But whatever it is, it's very, very unfortunate that Indian nationals are caught in this war zone between Russian troops and Ukraine. Now, this young man, Naveen SG, was from Karnataka. And like him, there are hundreds, if not a few thousand students. At last count, there were about 8,000 students still stuck inside Ukraine. There are about 20,000 Indian students on the whole. About 12,000 have been able to make their way out, very fortunately. Air India flights are being flown to neighboring countries, to Poland, to Moldavia, to Romania. And as Prime Minister Modi ordered a couple of days ago, on Monday, that other ministers in his government, Hardeep Singh Puri, the Urban Development Minister, Kiren Rijiju, the Law and Justice Minister, Jyotiraditya Scindia, the Civil Aviation Minister, will all be, and VK Singh, of course, the Junior Road and Transport Minister. All these 4 gentlemen have reached the various countries that they were supposed to go: Hungary, Romania, Poland, Moldavia, and they are going to work with these governments and try and extricate these Indian nationals, these Indian students from inside the war zone in Ukraine. Now, the Prime Minister's orders, which is to expand External Affairs Minister Mr. Jaishankar's remit, which is to incorporate these 4 additional ministers and ask them to help out the External Affairs Ministry from rescuing these citizens, is very unusual. And one of the reasons why this has happened is because there was a lot of criticism about the Indian government, about the Ministry of External Affairs. Helplines had, of course, been set up. Advisories had been issued as far back as January, telling people that they must come out on what could become a severe crisis, a potential conflict. But what has happened very unfortunately these last few days is that young students have been posting their messages online, and they have talked about the troubles that they are in. Very moving, eloquent messages that say that the Indian embassy in Kiev hasn't been able to help very much, and they don't know what to do. And they, begin by saying Jai Hind and Jai Bharat, and they end by saying Jai Hind and Jai Bharat. But in between, they talk about how nothing is being done at all to help them try and get out of this situation. Now, first things first. The first is that these students are caught in a war zone. This is a war. This is not a kiddie party. The Ukrainians are caught. Innocent civilians are being killed for no rhyme or reason. We understand why the Russians invaded Ukraine, or at least the Russians have tried to tell us why they invaded Ukraine, because the West was not willing to integrate or to incorporate the Russian position in the larger security architecture of Europe. But that doesn't mean that the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, that certainly doesn't mean that he should walk across the line and invade an independent sovereign country. But be that as it may, we are not talking about that stuff in this edition of Global Print. What I'm saying is that when the students got caught, when the Indian students got caught in this war zone inside Ukraine, there was very little help that was offered to them. You had the Indian ambassador in Ukraine, Mr. Partho Chatterjee. I'm sure a very, very well-meaning person. He did issue one video in which he spoke about the fact that the Indian embassy was always there to help out all Indian citizens, all Indian nationals stuck inside the war zone. But unfortunately, these Indian students were either not able to reach the Indian ambassador or other Indian diplomat situations in that embassy, or the Indian ambassador and his team were not able to reach out to these Indian students. Now, you might argue, and you would be right, is that in a war zone, how difficult is it for Indian diplomats stationed in the embassy to be able to reach out? That it's very, very difficult to reach out to 8,000 Indian students still stuck inside that war zone. Like we said, it's a war. So naturally, just like other thousands and millions of Ukrainian civilians who are stuck in this war between invading Russian troops and defending Ukrainian troops, just like that, the Indian citizens are also stuck. Now, that's something that you would expect to happen. But the larger point that I'm making is that the inability of the Ministry of External Affairs or the Indian government in general to offer succor to these Indian students. Now, if you can't do very much because, you're stuck inside a war zone, what you can do is to keep sending them messages, whether on their mobile phones, generally to bombard the internet with messages from all parties, the ministers themselves, the diplomats, both in Delhi and in Ukraine and the neighboring countries, to say, listen, just keep your calm. Don't get worried. Don't be nervous. We know you will be nervous. We know that you feel that your life is being threatened, but just hold on. We are there. We're going to come and assist you, and nothing is going to happen to you. All people need, especially young people, especially students, especially children who are perhaps the age of your children and mine, all they need is to be told that there is somebody there who has your back, and that your parents or your government is not going to let them down. Now, unfortunately, that did not happen. And in this time, the voice of compassion and empathy that was so required, that was missing, and that once belonged to Sushma Swaraj. She was India's former External Affairs Minister when she passed away, a very, very able politician who had risen from the ranks. She was a very young lawyer in Chandigarh when she first started politics and rose to right to the very top. But what was so special about Sushma ji was this voice of compassion, this compassion that permeated her entire being. And we will all remember how she turned the Twitter handle of the Ministry of External Affairs into a personal mission where she tried to reach out to every Indian who had a problem. So if you needed a visa, if you wanted to get married and you were not able to because perhaps the passport officer or somebody wasn't able to give you a certificate, so as to whatever it was, these from the smallest problems to the most strategic issue that India was to deal with. Sushma Swaraj was there at hand, willing to listen to you. And I think that's what these Indian students want and need even today. Air India flights will fly, special flights will try and get these students out. These 4 ministers are already there in the various neighboring countries, in the capitals of these neighboring countries. The Ministry of External Affairs is no doubt working round the clock. The Minister, Mr. Jaishankar, the Foreign Secretary, Mr. Harsh Shringla, no doubt everybody is working round the clock. But this voice of compassion that is so needed just to reach out to these young students has not happened until the Prime Minister Modi, took charge and ordered his government ministers that much more needs to be done and much more must be seen to be done. And let me just give you 2 examples of these young Indian students about the video messages that they put up online. One, a young girl called Garima Mishra from Lucknow in Uttar Pradesh talked about how nobody was coming to her help. Then there was this other Gujarati parent, and this was a recorded audio message that was put online. And this Gujarati gentleman who spoke to the Ministry of External Affairs helpline, and the official on the other end of the line said to this parent, well, you should have listened to our advisory. We issued an advisory as long back as in January. Why didn't you listen then? Now, instead of offering comfort, these parents are being scolded about not doing what they perhaps should have done a long time ago. It's not even their responsibility. But nobody knew that there was going to be a war until the war happened 1 week ago. So for parents to be scolded, or for children to be, or young people to be told that, listen, this is your fault, because that's the implicit message that's coming across, I think Prime Minister Modi understood that this is something that was unacceptable. He understands the power of social media like nobody else in this country, and perhaps like very few other people in the world. He understood, Prime Minister Modi understood that in the middle of this massive election, the mother of all elections underway in Uttar Pradesh, and in fact what's interesting is that this operation to send special flights to the neighboring countries around Ukraine has been called Operation Ganga, which is certainly a reference to the Ganga River, which flows right across Uttar Pradesh, and the Prime Minister, no less, has referred to how the Indian government is trying to help evacuate these young Indian students from Ukraine in the middle, when he campaigns in UP. So one was Garima Mishra, her video is online, you might want to check that out, and the Gujarati parent who was speaking to the Ministry of External Affairs official. So the Prime Minister taking charge, realizing that the MEA had not lived up to the expectations, at least of these young Indian students. And while the MEA, the Ministry of External Affairs, has done an amazing job responding to criticisms elsewhere in the world of why it abstained, for example, twice at the UN Security Council, why it seemed to be supporting Russia, certainly not formally, but informally. So the MEA has done a fabulous job of defending India's national interest on that front. But on the front of the Indian students, the MEA has not exhibited the kind of compassion and empathy that they were perhaps looking for. So I will end my column on this note, but I do look forward to you reading my column on the Prince website and hearing what you have to say about this video. Thank you so much for watching.